step back and take a good look at your clematis this week. 10 feet of fence or trellis, and every flower the plant owns is packed into one green tangled bun right at the very top, while everything below your eyeline is bare brown string. So why does a climber famous for smothering whole walls in bloom insist on flowering where only the pigeons get a decent view? The answer is a hormone the plant manufactures every single day of the growing season. And the fix is 3 soft ties on every stem. I did this wrong for about a decade before an old fruit grower straightened me out. And today I am handing you the whole method, some weight off your shoulders before anything else, because I suspect you have been quietly blaming yourself. That top knot of flowers and the bare stemmy legs beneath it are not the mark of a neglected plant or a careless gardener. They are what Clematis does when nobody intervenes. The Royal Horticultural Society, the people who run the trial gardens at Wisley and have been studying climbers longer than any of us have been alive, puts it in writing. Left unpruned and untrained, Clematis turns into a mass of tangled stems with a bare base and flowers well above eye level. That is their description of the default plant, not the failed one. Walk down any street of back gardens in June, and you will see the same silhouette repeated on fence after fence, a bird's nest of green foam balanced on stilts. The plant is not broken. The plant is winning by its own rules. Our job is to change the rules, and the lovely thing is that the plant will cooperate completely once we do. To change the rules, you need to know what game the clematis thinks it is playing. Picture a single clematis stem running straight up your fence panel. At the summit of that stem sits the growing tip, a soft green point smaller than a grain of rice. Down the length of the stem, tucked in at every pair of leaves, sit dormant buds, and every one of them is capable of becoming a flowering side shoot. On a healthy stem, you might count a dozen or more of these sleeping buds between the soil and the tip. So the flowers for your whole fence already exist. They are sitting there in the bark right now, waiting. The question worth asking is why they stay asleep. They stay asleep because the tip tells them to. The growing point at the top of the stem manufactures a hormone called auxin. An auxin flows downward through the stem like a chemical memo, and the memo reads the same thing all the way down. Stay dormant, I am handling the climbing. Botanists call this apical dominance, the dominance of the apex, the tip. 2 plant scientists, Kenneth Thyman and Volker Skoog, pinned this down in 1933 with a famously simple experiment on broad bean plants. They snipped off the growing tip, watched the buds below burst into growth, then dabbed pure auxin on the cut stump, and the buds went straight back to sleep. The tip itself was never the boss. The hormone was. 90 years of research later, that finding still stands at the center of how we understand plant shape. Now, pay attention to this next detail, because it is the hinge the entire video turns on. Auxin moves with gravity down a vertical stem, which keeps the suppression signal strong along the whole length. But lay that same stem toward horizontal, and the signal weakens along its run. The buds stop hearing the memo clearly. One by one they wake, and each one throws a flowering side shoot upward. A vertical clematis stem gives you one burst of bloom at the tip. The identical stem, held at a shallow angle, gives you a row of flowering shoots along its entire length, like teeth rising from a comb. Nothing about the plant changed, only the angle did. That idea took me embarrassingly long to believe, and the evidence was hanging on my own fence the whole time. Angle is not decoration. Angle is instruction. When you bend a stem down toward level, you are speaking to the plant in its own chemical language, and what you are saying is flower everywhere, not just at the top. If this sounds like a new trick, it is roughly 3 centuries old. Walk into any old walled kitchen garden in England or France, and look at the pear trees flattened against the brickwork. Branches trained out sideways in perfect horizontal tiers, every branch studded with fruiting spurs from trunk to tip. That is espalier, and orchardists have used it since before anyone knew what a hormone was, precisely because a horizontal branch fruits along its whole length while a vertical one races upward and fruits only at the end. Those gardeners did not have the chemistry, they had the observation, We get to use both. And the fruit grower who first explained it to me said something I have repeated to every gardening friend since. Every bud on a sideways branch believes it is the top. Hold that sentence, alls. We will come back to it at the end. So, the physics is settled. The question becomes how to hold clematis stems at flowering angles on a real fence through wind and rain and a full season of growth without wrestling the plant every weekend. Here is where clematis turns out to be almost suspiciously well suited to the job, and the reason is in how it climbs. Clematis does not climb the way its neighbors do. Wisteria wraps its whole muscular stem around a post like a python. Virginia creeper glues itself to brick with little sticky pads. Clematis does neither. It climbs with its petioles, the slender stalks that connect each leaf to the stem. When a young petiole brushes against something thin, it slowly reaches around and wraps it, a behavior botanists call thigmotropism, growth in response to touch. And then, at the point of contact, the plant performs its best trick. The cells of that petiole swell and stiffen, the wrap thickens into a hard little hook, and the hold becomes permanent. The plant does not just grab the support, it welds itself on, one leaf stalk at a time. There is a catch, and the catch is the whole design brief for your fence. A petiole is short, it can only wrap something roughly pencil thin. Give clematis a fat fence post or a wide lattice slat, and the petioles paw at it and find nothing to close around, which is why so many clematis slump at the bottom of a perfectly good trellis. What the plant wants is wire, twine, netting, thin bamboo. So before a single tie goes on, string your fence or wall with a grid of thin horizontal lines. Stretched galvanized wire on vine eyes works for decades, and plain garden twine run between screws works fine for a season or three. Space. The horizontal runs roughly 12 to 18 inches apart, from knee height up to the top of the fence. Those lines are about to become the flowering tiers of your fan. And once each trained stem is tied along a line, the plant's own petioles will reach out, wrap the thin wire, swell, and lock your training in place for you. You do the persuading. The clematis does the permanent paperwork. Two small details about those lines will save you real frustration. The first is speed. A young petiole that touches a wire can complete its coil within a day or two, which means a stem you tie onto a line in the morning is often gripping it on its own before the weekend. Training a clematis is not a long negotiation. It is an introduction, and the plant takes it from there. The flip side is just as true, and it explains a lot of sulking clematis. A shoot that reaches out and finds nothing thin enough to wrap will stall, and that section of growth can simply stop and die back. When the bottom half of a trellis is all wide slats and fat posts, the lower shoots give up while the upper ones find the neighboring shrubs and the gutter bracket, and the whole plant migrates upward. Bare legs, again, for a completely mechanical reason this time. The second detail is clearance. If you are fixing wire to a solid fence or a wall, mounted on vine eyes or spacers so the line stands an inch or so proud of the surface, a petiole needs to pass right around the wire to close its loop, and a line pinned flat against the boards only offers half a handhold. That little gap also lets air move behind the foliage, which the plant will thank you for in a damp August. The method itself, then, and I will give it to you exactly the way I practice it, because the discipline is the difference between a fan that holds and a fan that quietly falls apart by July. In late winter or early spring, stand in front of the plant while the framework is in plain view and the growth is young. Choose your strongest stems, ideally 3, 4, 5 of them, rising from low on the plant. These are your ribs. Now think of a hand fan, the folding kind, opened flat against the fence. The ribs of a hand fan all start from one point at the base and spread wide, and the outermost ribs sit nearly level. That is the shape you are building. The outer stems get bent down closest to horizontal and led along the bottom wires left and right. The middle stems take the middle wires at a gentle diagonal. Only the centermost stem is allowed anything close to upright, and even that one benefits from a lean. The steeper the rib, the fewer flowers along it. The flatter the rib, the more buds wake. Widest spread at the bottom, always. Each rib then gets exactly 3 soft ties, and each tie has its own job. Tie 1 sits low, close to where the stem leaves the crowd at the base of the plant. This tie is the anchor. It fixes the stem's point of departure and sets its outward direction, left or right, along the fence. Without it, the whole rib pivots at the bottom and the fan drifts. Tie 2 sits at mid-stem, and this is the tie doing the hormonal work. It is the one holding the rib down at its shallow angle against every instinct the plant has. Remember, Clematis wants vertical, auxin rewards vertical, and a stem held by only its base and tip will arch upward in the middle within weeks. And the moment the middle of the stem points at the sky, the buds along it go back to sleep. Tie 2 is the sentence in plant language that says, stay flat, keep flowering. If you skip one tie of the 3, never let it be this one. Tie 3 sits near the tip, and it aims the growing point along the fence line rather than up it. The tip is where next month's extension growth comes from, so tie 3 decides where the fan goes next. Point the tip sideways, and the rib keeps lengthening along its wire, throwing flowering shoots as it goes. Leave the tip loose and it turns skyward within days, and the whole stem starts reorganizing itself around a new vertical leader. 3 ties per rib, fewer, and the stem springs back upright, and the fan collapses back into the top knot you were trying to escape. I learned that by losing a beautifully fanned Viticella to a single windy week in May, back when I thought 2 ties looked tidier. The plant does not care what looks tidier. And through the season, you will check those ties and reset them as the plant grows, because training is a conversation, not a single command. A word on the ties themselves, because the hardware matters more than people expect. Soft materials only. Garden twine, strips of old cloth, purpose-made rubber or foam plant ties from any garden centre. Never bare wire twisted around a stem, and I say that as a man who once found a wire twist from a forgotten plant label soaring halfway through a rose cane. A clematis stem thickens as it matures, and a hard tie that fit in April strangles in August. Place each tie just above a leaf node where the stem is strongest, and tie it snug enough to hold the angle but loose enough that you could slide a pencil under the loop. Then revisit and loosen or retie as the stems fatten through the season. Handle young stems the way you would handle a sleeping cat. Clematis stems are brittle. Bend an older stem forcefully, and it snaps at the base with a sound that still makes me wince. So you bend them young and green, a little at a time. If a stem resists the full angle in one session, take it halfway, tie it, and finish the bend a couple of weeks later. Through the peak of the growing season, new shoots need tying in every week or two, and every single one of them will be reaching for vertical, because the plant never stops trying to rebuild its tower. 10 minutes with a ball of twine on a Saturday morning is the entire maintenance bill, and that is the machinery of the whole transformation. Thin wires, low angles, 3 soft ties per stem, checked as the season runs. There is one prerequisite I have been saving, and for some of you it is the missing piece. A fan needs ribs, a handful of strong stems rising from the base, and a clematis that came home from the nursery and went in the ground untouched usually runs up as one stem, maybe 2, because in the nursery pot it was a single-rooted cutting racing a cane for the light. You cannot fan one stem. The Royal Horticultural Society's advice on this is blunt, and it shocks nearly everyone the first time they hear it. Unless the plant already has 3 or 4 healthy stems from the base, cut all newly planted climbing clematis back hard, the first spring, down to roughly 6 inches to a foot above the ground, just above a fat pair of buds. Yes, the whole plant, down near your boot. That single brutal-looking cut removes the dominant tips entirely, floods the base buds with permission, and the plant answers with a cluster of new stems from low down. Those stems are your ribs. The fan is built from what that hard early prune provides. I have stood beside more than one gardener holding the secateurs, hovering over a healthy young plant they paid good money for, and I will tell you what I told them. The kindest cut you will ever make is the one that feels like vandalism. While we're down at the root end of things, one more habit stacks the deck for a multi-stemmed future, and it starts on planting day. Set a clematis in its hole with the top of the root ball a couple of inches below the surrounding soil, deeper than almost anything else you plant, and firm the ground over it. That buried stretch of stem carries dormant buds of its own, and burying them banks a reserve of future shoots underground, ready to push up fresh stems from below the surface for years to come. For the big flowered hybrids, it is also cheap insurance, because if clematis wilt ever collapses the top growth, a deep planted specimen can shoot again from those underground buds and rebuild, where a shallow planted one is often finished. A fan drawn from a deep, well-fed base renews itself. Feed the root run each spring, keep it cool and moist under a stone slab or a shading perennial, and the ribs keep coming. One Climber's Rescue Covered. The Flower Gardener's Bible book cover holds 38 more plants and a month-by-month calendar. $9 at the URL bloomrelay.co. If your plant is already established and leggy, an old topknot on stilts, the renovation route depends on which pruning group it belongs to, and that group's yearly timetable is what keeps the finished fan flowering year after year, so it deserves a proper walkthrough. Clematis divides into 3 groups by when and where it flowers, and if you are unsure of yours, watch when it blooms this year and the group identifies itself. Group 1 holds the early spring bloomers, the Alpina and Macropetala and Montana types, the ones covered in nodding bells or starry flowers in April and May. They flower on old wood, on stems that grew last year, which means every stem you cut in winter is a fistful of spring flowers gone. Old hands keep it straight with a saying worth stitching on a cushion. If it flowers before June, do not prune. So Group 1 gets pruned only right after flowering finishes, and only as much as space demands. And here is a detail that deserves to be far better known. The Alpina types, trained flat on horizontal wires and exactly the fan we have been building, will hold a neat, flower-clad framework for years with almost no cutting at all. The fan becomes the permanent architecture, dressed in fresh bells every April. Of the 3 groups, this is the one where the training does nearly all the work, and the secateurs barely leave the shed. Group 2 holds the big, glamorous mid-season hybrids, the dinner plate flowers of May and June, many of which come back for a second, lighter show in late summer. The first and best flush comes on short shoots springing from last year's wood. Prune those hard in winter, and you have mailed the year's main display straight to the compost heap, which is a mistake I made once in my first garden and still think about every June. So Group 2 gets a light tidy only in late winter, dead and weak growth traced back to a healthy pair of buds, and otherwise the fanned ribs stay. Your training holds from year to year, and the plant flowers along the framework you built. But suppose your Group 2 is the patient on the table, an old plant gone bare and woody at the base with its dinner plates all crowded up top. There is a recognized renovation route, and the timing is the clever part. Let it give you the first flush of flowers in early summer, enjoy every one of them, and then, immediately after that display, cut the whole plant back to around a foot from the ground. You sacrifice the second, lighter flush for that 1 year, and in exchange the plant spends the rest of the season throwing strong young growth from the base, exactly the ribs your fan has been waiting for. Tie them onto the wires as they come, and by the following June the first flush opens along a low, wide framework instead of a distant tangle. 1 summer of patience buys back the whole bottom of the plant. Group 3 holds the late bloomers, the Viticellas and the Jackmanii types, and the little yellow lantern species, flowering from midsummer into autumn entirely on wood grown that same year. These get the famous hard cut, every stem down to about a foot, to the lowest healthy pairs of buds in late winter. And I can hear the objection from here. Does that not destroy the fan every single February? It sounds like it should. It does not. And understanding why is understanding the method at its deepest level. The permanent part of a Group 3 fan was never the stems, it is the low framework, the wires, the tie positions, the discipline. Each spring the plant sends up a fresh sheaf of vigorous new stems from those low buds, and you simply fan the new ribs onto the same lines, 3 ties apiece, same angles, same shape. The fan is reborn annually, and by June it is furnished from the bottom because every rib started at boot height. Now run the logic in reverse. An unpruned group 3 keeps growing each year from wherever last year's stems ended, higher and higher, bare below, blooming above. An unpruned group 3 is precisely the plant that ends up flowering only at the very top of the fence. If that description fits the plant outside your window, you now know its group, its rescue, and its calendar, all in one. We have talked all along as though every clematis grows on a flat fence, and plenty of yours do not. So the fan needs to travel to the other structures in the garden because the geometry adapts beautifully. On a fence or a house wall, it is the classic flat fan we have built all along. Horizontal wires, ribs spread wide, widest and lowest spread at the bottom, 3 ties per rib. Stand back after tying and the shape should read instantly. A hand fan opened against the boards. On an obelisk, a pillar or a stout post, there is no width to spread into, and here the fan performs its cleverest costume change. It becomes a spiral. Take each stem and coil it around the structure at a shallow angle, like the stripe on a barber's pole, tying as you go. Look at what that spiral really is. Every inch of stem is held close to level while the structure carries it upward. It is horizontal training wrapped around a vertical, the same hormone trick bent into a corkscrew. A clematis allowed to run straight up, an obelisk flowers in a tuft at the finial. The same plant spiraled around it closed the column in bloom from the ground up. And visitors will ask what variety it is, convinced yours is different from theirs. It is not. It is the same plant, holding a different conversation. And on a low fence, a rail fence or a knee wall along a path, you can play the boldest card of all. Run the stems almost perfectly flat along the top rail, tied at intervals, and let the flowering side shoots rise off that horizontal run like teeth on a comb. A low fence dressed this way becomes a hedge of flowers at exactly the height where you can look every bloom in the face, and it uses the plant's chemistry at full strength because nothing wakes buds like a stem held dead level. Whatever the structure, the rhythm of the year stays the same, and it is a gentle rhythm. The main event is late winter and early spring. That is when the stems are visible without their leaves, when young growth is green and bendable, when pruning happens for the groups that need it, and when the fan is set or reset, rib by rib, tie by tie, an hour with the radio on. From then until autumn, the job is minutes a week. Walk the fence with twine in your pocket, catch each new shoot while it is soft, and tuck it onto the wires at a low angle before it hardens vertical. Young growth accepts any suggestion. Older growth has opinions. The entire skill of summer training is getting there while the stem is still listening, and it is honestly one of the pleasantest small jobs in the garden, 2 minutes of quiet fiddling on the way to the shed. Now the honest ledger, because 30 years of this has taught me to distrust any method solved without one. The fan will not conjure flowers a variety never makes. A shy bloomer in deep shade stays a shy bloomer in deep shade, and no amount of twine changes that. The fan will not turn one weak stem into 10. That multiplication comes from the hard prune first, and skipping the prune to save a season usually costs 2. And if you are renovating an old leggy plant, the first year after fanning is a rebuilding year. You will see improvement fast, side shoots breaking low on stems that have been bare for years, and that first sight is genuinely exciting. But the full effect, the bottom to top curtain, is a 2-season project, and anyone who promises it faster is selling something other than gardening. Set your expectations there, and every season will beat them. Let me paint the picture you are actually working toward, because you have earned it. It is early summer, 2 years on. The same clematis that once bloomed in a top knot 10 feet up, an ornament for the neighbor's bedroom window, now opens flowers at knee height beside the path, at waist height where you deadhead in passing, and at shoulder height where the scent finds you, all in the same week on the same plant, along ribs you can trace with a finger, from the base to the far end of the fence. Nothing about that plant's nature changed. You changed what its buds believe. Remember the fruit grower's sentence from the start of all this. Every bud on a sideways stem believes it is the top. Your fence is now a wall of tops. So this week, while the idea is warm, go stand in front of your clematis and count the stems at the base. That count tells you everything. whether you fan this spring or prune hard and fan next. If this way of gardening suits you, the kind built on structure and patience and a ball of twine, subscribe, because every week on this channel we take one permanent planting and teach it to perform for decades. I will see you at the fence.